This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Professor. It's my pleasure to be here to talk on Sino-US relationship. Actually, since the establishment of the diplomatic relations between China and the United States, the relationship between China and the United States has generally been in a process of unstable. I think this feature is mainly determined by the respective interests of these two countries. Nowadays, I think the relationship between China and the United States are constructive in most of the fields. Of course, problematic in some fields. If we look at the relationship between China and the United States, I can say that it is the relationship of mutual interdependence. And it is the relationship of the hope of the world, because these two countries are too important. United States is the biggest developed country, and China is the biggest developing country. And it is developing with very, very high speed. And this sort of development has aroused the attention from the outside world, especially from the United States, which is an existing hegemon in the world today. China and the United States have maintained a constructive relationship in many fields, as I mentioned just now. For example, in the promotion of development of the mutual interest, in maintaining the peace and the stability in East Asia, in promoting the development of the world as well. What I want to emphasize in particular is the fact that United States and China are carrying out cooperation and collaboration on many international issues, like nuclear issue in North Korea, nuclear issue in Iran, and peacekeeping operations in different parts of the world in the framework of the United Nations, and also in promoting development in different areas in the world today. Why could China and the United States have been able to collaborate and cooperate with each other? It is because we have common interest on a series of international issues. We have common interest between ourselves. And also because that both China and the United States shoulder the responsibility of maintaining peace and stability in the world today and promoting the development of the world. Therefore, I'm optimistic about future of Sino-US relationship. However, this relationship is not without any problem. We have problems. I think in the future, we will see three major problems in the Sino-US relationship. One is distrust. Whatever the Chinese say will not be trusted by the United States or Americans, especially those practitioners in Washington, D.C. Chinese say, we will never challenge the leadership of the United States. We have no intention to drive the Americans out of East Asia or Pacific, Western Pacific. But I don't think most of the Americans believe what the Chinese are saying. And Chinese say we will stick to the road of peaceful development. And I don't think most of the Americans believe that Chinese will develop peacefully forever, because they have taken the road of expansion since the founding of the United States of America. And they try to mirror image China. Of course, if you look at China from a mirror, it is impossible for the Americans to trust China. If you look at the history, culture, traditions of China, I think you may have a different understanding of China. Chinese are reluctant to be a leader, because to be a leader, you have to contribute more. You have to fulfill your obligations. We Chinese are a little bit selfish. Of course, it is impossible for the Chinese to trust the Americans. Why? It is because if we look at the behavior or practice, especially the military practice of the United States around China, on China's periphery, it is very hard to make the Chinese to trust the United States. So, for example, with the modification of U.S. strategy, United States is pivoting to Asia. And what you have done? Mostly military actions. So in China, there is an argument from some of the scholars. There are 4 countries which are practicing the policy of military first. North Korea openly declared to the world, while the other 3 countries did not. That's Iran, Israel, and the United States. Because if you look at the modification of your strategy by pivoting to Asia, what the Chinese see are the military practices, military actions. For example, more strengthening of the security alliances, increased military exercises, increased intensity and frequency of close-range reconnaissance against China, continued arms sale to Taiwan. So all these have been regarded by the Chinese as anti-China moves. They are all intended against or intended to contain China's development. So under such a condition, how could Chinese trust the United States, especially the present policy? Because of the distrust between these 2 countries, we have come into the second problem, that is miscalculation between the 2 sides. Chinese miscalculated the intentions of the United States. And they believe that most of actions, even some people believe every action in the military field in Asia has been intended to contain China's development. Of course, I don't think most of the Chinese believe that, but many Chinese believe that. This is true. While the United States or the Americans will have to ask the Chinese, why do the Chinese have to develop its navy, or in your words, the blue water navy? Why do the Chinese have to expand its capabilities in the outer space? Why do the Chinese have to expand its capabilities in cyberspace? What are the real intentions? Why do the Chinese have to modernize its military hardware, especially the nuclear forces? So they believe that all these actions from the Chinese side are intended against United States, finally for the purpose of driving the Americans out of East Asia and Western Pacific, and to take over the leadership from the United States, at least in East Asia, or as a first step, to take over the leadership from the United States in East Asia, and then the leadership of the world. I believe that this is, again, miscalculation. So there are miscalculations between China and the United States, especially between the practitioners of the 2 governments and 2 militaries. because of the first and the second problem, we have the third problem, that is action and reaction. If you look at the situation in East Asia and in Western Pacific, and even throughout the world, up to the outer space, there are races between China and the United States. This is true. If you don't agree with that, if you don't see that, I don't think it's rational enough. Why this rises? It is because of distrust. It is because of the miscalculations between the two sides. Therefore, to maintain the constructiveness of the relationship between China and the United States, the Chinese and the Americans will have to sit down to frankly exchange their views, to frankly express their concerns over the other side, and to frankly listen to the other side. The complaints on you, I believe this is very, very important. It is important for us to increase confidence. It is important for us to increase mutual understanding. It is important for us to build up trust and reduce the miscalculation and control action and reaction. So under the present situation, I believe that it is very, very urgent for the scholars, for the students of Sino-US relations, for the students of national security, for those practitioners to take into consideration of increasing dialogues between the two sides, especially between the security sectors. Actually, we have established 96 consultation and dialogue mechanisms between China and the United States. Some of them have worked pretty well, some of them are not so good. But I believe this is not enough. We have to increase the depth of the dialogue. We have to increase the width of the exchanges. And we have to increase the number of the exchanges. This, I believe, is very important. Finally, many of the Americans might be pretty much concerned about China's development in the future. I'm here to tell you what the Chinese are planning to do. We Chinese attach great importance to road. Road is of extreme importance for the nation, for an enterprise, for a child, and for an individual people. For an individual people, they have the road of life. For a child, they have the road of education and development. For enterprises, they have the road of development. And for China, we have the road for future development. What road China will stick to? That is the road of a socialist road with Chinese characteristics. Why do Chinese emphasize the socialist road with the characteristics of China? It is because under the modern conditions, it is impossible for the Chinese to take the road of colonialism. It is impossible for China to take the road of imperialism, to carry out the expansion and aggression everywhere. It is impossible for China to take the road of fascism, like Japan and Germany did. It is impossible for China to take the Cold War road because there you find that people throughout the world were living under terror. There we witnessed the confrontation between two superpowers. A lot of investment was a waste on the military. And it is impossible for China to take the road of United States, which seeks unilateral hegemony. Therefore, we have got different perceptions. We advocate common security instead of collective security. We advocate common development instead of development of some countries or some regions. That is why we Chinese emphasize very much the road of the socialist road of capitalism. In China, the situation is not that we did not practice capitalism. We practiced. It did not work. We practiced it during Dr. Sun Yat-sen's, under the Sun Yat-sen's leadership. We practiced it during the Republic of China when Chiang Kai-shek ruled China. It was not successful. Therefore, we advocated the socialist road with Chinese characteristics. Under this road, Chinese hope to develop itself into a powerful country. After 40 years, so Chinese objective of their grand strategy is to develop China into a powerful country by the year 2050. That is the objective, long-term objective. Of course, the near-term objective of China's grand strategy is to double the GDP on the basis of 2010 by 2020, and double the individual income on the basis of 2010 by 2020. That's the near-term objective. How to realize or materialize this objective? By aggression, by launching wars. We Chinese are not very wise enough, but we are fast learners. Americans launched the Vietnam War when it was at the peak of its strength. It failed. And the Americans did not win the war completely in Iraq and Afghanistan. How could we Chinese win a war? How could we Chinese launch an aggression against any other country? That's impossible. So I hope that the American friends can rest assured that China will not pursue its development by aggression, by launching wars, or by enforcing the others to take China's road, to practice China's socialist system, to practice China's value, or to practice China's ideology. It's impossible. The experience of success since the introduction of the policy of opening to the outside and reform tells us that China can only develop in a peaceful way. No other way can make China develop so fast. This is our experience. Therefore, I would suggest our American friends present here that don't worry about China. Chinese have neither capability, no intention to challenge the leadership of the United States, not to mention to take over the leadership of the United States. Chinese are reluctant to do that because Chinese are selfish. Of course, China seeks development through cooperation. China is willing to cooperate with the United States. I'm here in the States to talk at a seminar which was sponsored by Denver University together with University of from South Africa on China in Africa. In this talk, I listed 8 fields of possible or potential cooperation between China and the United States in Africa. So if you look at the world, how many fields are there for China to cooperate in the future with the United States? I think many, many. I think for Sino-US relationship, cooperation is the only way lying in front of us. No other choice. I think I'd better stop here. I promised to talk about 30 minutes. I'm ready to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Jim. Major Cheng Hu.
If you could identify yourself as well.
My name is Mark Miller, and I appreciate many of the people in your country and respect some of your policies, particularly policies that elevate the common good. Many good things to say. But in terms of the country as a nation and some of the military responses that I've seen, and I will point out 3, I find there's a discord with the trust and the talk. And as an example, today, China locked on, militarily locked on. It was either the Coast Guard or military planes of Japan that were patrolling the islands, which are in dispute between Japan and China. Militarily locked on those implements. Whenever England turned over its leasehold interest to Hong Kong, China's way of handling the transition was to roll tanks into the center of town, into a peaceful, previously independent nation. Many instances between that time and the last one that I'll point out exemplify the same thing. But when China decided it wanted to take Tibet, it went into a peaceful nation and took Tibet some 60 years ago. And to this day, if you get a map printed in China, I would suspect you won't see Tibet on that map. And so all the dialogue will never lead to a change in trust if there's not a change in behavior. And from my position, this sort of military behavior is at a minimum provocative, but from my position, unacceptable. And again, I say I appreciate many of your people, many of your policies, and I applaud the rising of your society.
Okay, thank you very much. You listed 3 issues that there are China's practice. China took the military action. Number 1 on Diaoyu Island or Miscalculation Island. I think you know the history. And if you look at the official document of the Second World War, you may find that all these documents urged the Japanese to return to territories which were occupied by the Japanese through means of war. During the Cairo Conference, President Roosevelt talked with Mr. Chiang Kai-shek to return all the territories to China, including Ryukyu Islands, not only Diaoyu Island. And on Diaoyu Island, I think in 1915, in January 15th, 1915, the Prime Minister, the Emperor of Japan issued a protocol order. In your words, annexed Diaoyu Island. What I want to mention in particular is the fact that the Second World War order was not implemented in Asia. Why? I think our American friends understood this much better than I do. Therefore, Diaoyu Island, according to the international documents and the laws, it is China's territory. Chinese did not take any military action to change the status quo. It is the Japanese who declared the purchase of the island. And it is Japanese first sent their military aircraft to the island. And we responded. Otherwise, the leaders of the Chinese, I don't think, can stay in Zhongnanhai any longer. They will be firmly opposed by the Chinese people, by the Chinese nation. So I don't think it's illegal to respond in that way. Secondly, on the Tibet, yes, after the Second World War, China fell into 3 years of a civil war, not only in Tibet, but also throughout the country. All the country was taken over by the Communist Party armed forces in the military way instead of not only Tibet. Of course, many of Americans are pretty much concerned about the present situation in Tibet. I don't know if the socialist system is better than slave system, or slave system is better than socialist system. I hope you can make a calculation and a comparison between them. What is the slave system? Of course, all of us present here have no practical experience, but I think you can find it from historical books. As far as Hong Kong military parade or military tanks rode over Hong Kong street, yes, it's true, because the British left. And I still remember, except the foreign policy and the military, which are the token of sovereignty, comes to the central government, all others are the business of Hong Kong people. So the mainlanders, I mean the central government, does not take any action in other fields. Since the British left, and they didn't leave these the weapons to Chinese military. So how to get there? We drop there, or we ship there. I think by driving there, it's more convenient. It's much, much more convenient than parachuting there or then shipping there. I think don't try to understand that the Chinese are so evil. Any action is hostile to any others. So that's what I want to say to the 3 points you listed. Thank you.
Relatively short questions.
Yeah, Neil, thank you. Neil Schulman, a professor here. We've had a global humanitarian summit here for many years. Students from China have helped organize it. Rich people, poor people from all over the world can come who just help people to make sure everybody has food, shelter, health care, and peace, so the human species can be humane. 4 students from Peking University came. The richest man from Kuwait came. I wonder, is there any possibility that a free event like this could also take place at Peking University? And it would also have something where people just come together to volunteer and help one another. So it's not just money, it's just making sure everybody has the basics, and we can all, whether we're rich or poor, help each other. And if you could get Peking University to do that after Emory did, it could take this global. Very quickly, we had Martin Luther King here. He had a dream. It would be nice if we had a dream that the human species could be humane.
Thank you. It's a very good idea. Actually, Chinese in the past 30 years or so did neglect the faith. And of course, it's because of some of the officials' corruption has produced very, very negative impact on the faith of China. Actually, the faith we are not short of. For example, in ancient time, we have Confucius. I think there is a very famous thinker from Anhui, which is Guanzi. He put forward the 4 characters. That is 礼义, 礼义, 廉耻. Who can help me to translate it? Polite, benign, responsibility, 礼义廉, and 耻, shame. So these are actually the values of China inherited from the ancient time. Of course, I have to admit, because of the introduction of the marketing economy in China, many Chinese are money-oriented. So many of the activities are of very, very strong commercial feature. This is true. So what your idea is very good. I hope that I can put forward my suggestions to the senior authority. Actually, in China, there are a lot of charity organizations and agencies. Of course, the university is the very important cradle for the future generations of China. And I believe they have the responsibility to do that. And I would suggest to the higher authority to practice this. Thank you very much, sir.
Good afternoon, sir, and thank you for your thoughtful remarks. My name is Clifton Pennell. I'm a retired professor of geography from the University of Georgia. My question relates to North Korea. I wonder if you could give us your thoughts about how China can assist in making North Korea a less hostile environment that would ensure more peace and stability in East Asia.
Thank you very much. This is a very complicated question because North Korea has maintained a very unique relationship with China. I believe that North Koreans have met with a series of sanctions stipulated by the resolutions of the United Nations. This is one aspect. On the other hand, we have to see that North Koreans have their security concerns. If you look at the situation, I believe that the security environment in the world today, the North Korean security environment is the most complicated one, is the most threatening one. So why do the North Koreans have to take a series of provocative actions against international community? I think they have their concerns. They have their own concerns, their own security concerns. So I hope that we can stand on the other's boot to think about this issue. By saying that, I do not mean I support the development of nuclear weapons. I support the nuclear experiment in North Korea. No, I'm resolutely against it. Because nuclear weapons in North Korea may not necessarily pose realistic challenge and threat to the security of the United States. But on the contrary, it is close to China. It is bordering China. And it may pose very serious challenge and the threat to China. Because I firmly trust what Mr. Palmerston said. There is neither eternal enemy, no eternal friend. There is only eternal interest. By saying that, I believe the relationship between between the countries always vary, always change. Before 1979, China and the United States were, or before 1972, China and the United States were very hostile, while today we are very friendly to each other. And we are cooperative in many fields, and we are dependent on each other. Who can imagine the the change of the nature of the relationship between China and the United States at that time. So is the relationship between China and North Korea. So China has been very, very responsible on implementing the resolutions of the United Nations. There is no doubt about it. And China will continue to work together with the world community, with the United States in particular, to address the North Korean issues, the nuclear issue. At the same time, I want to emphasize, don't try to believe that all the nuclear crises have been created by the North Koreans. I don't believe that. United States has much to do with that. Your deployment of the tactical nuclear weapons in southern part of the peninsula led to the joint program by the North Koreans and Russians in the nuclear field. If the framework agreement was implemented in time by the Keto members, I don't think North Koreans would have been able to, or would have been willing to withdraw from NPT and carried out the nuclear experiment. Therefore, I have to argue that United States, US nuclear policy is of extreme importance to the prevention of nuclear proliferation and to the settlement or resolution of the nuclear issue in North Korea, to peace and stability on Korean Peninsula. Maybe you may believe that I'm criticizing the United States. Yes, I'm always a critic of the policies, not only in China, not only in the States, but also in China. But I try to be neutral. I try to be responsible. Thank you.
General Hu, first of all, welcome to Atlanta, sir. I'm John Garver. I teach at Georgia Tech here. You're fairly well known in the United States for comments you made in 2005 to a group of Hong Kong journalists in Beijing, in which you said, in the context of a US-China conflict over Taiwan, regarding Taiwan, you said, if the Americans draw their missiles and position-guided munitions on Chinese territory, I think we will have to respond with nuclear weapons. If the Americans are determined to interfere, we'll be determined to respond. We Chinese will prepare ourselves for the destruction of all the cities east of Xi'an. Of course, the Americans will have to be prepared for hundreds of cities to be destroyed by the Chinese. Now, I appreciate your frankness.
Thank you.
And I understand that you often say provocative things to get a response. And I understand too, sir, that these are your own personal views. So with all those caveats in mind, could you please give us your own personal views, your frank personal views, about when China might resort to a nuclear first strike against the United States in the context of a conflict over Taiwan?
Number one, my talk was distorted and bubbled. There is a pretext. Number two, China's nuclear policy has never changed. We will never be the first to use nuclear weapons under any conditions. Because in this text, I was told that sinking of an aircraft carrier from the United States will lead to a total war. What is total war? Total war includes the use of the nuclear weapons. Therefore, I made the responses. So try to understand me in the whole text, not in the bubbled and distorted one. And thirdly, China will never be the first in the future to use nuclear weapons. And this sort of policy has been regarded as a propaganda in the past. But in the recent years, I've heard repeatedly by some of the American scholars, even practitioners, that they are considering the policy of no first use. And they don't believe that it is a propaganda from China, but it is a policy. At least it is a precondition for mutual trust. It is a precondition for the prevention of nuclear weapons, or for the prevention of the nuclear exchanges between two major powers. And it is the precondition for the prevention of nuclear weapons against those nuclear weapon-free countries. And that might be very, very effective in preventing the proliferation of nuclear weapons and in implementing NPT articles. And in the future, I believe, fourth point is that I don't think China will change this policy. Fifthly, I don't think there is any justification for China and the United States to war against each other on Taiwan. I don't think the American decision makers will make such a stupid decision to war against China on Taiwan. I think you might have thought about losses which might be brought about by the exchanges of fire or war over Taiwan in the mainland, because your interest in the mainland override that in Taiwan in a huge margin. So I don't think the decision makers, White House or State Department or DOD will make such a stupid policies. Therefore, I don't think there is the possibility for us to enter into a nuclear exchange. Thank you.
I'm William Foster from the Samnon School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech. There's a lot of debate in Atlanta in China scholars about how Chinese feel about arms control agreements. Some people say that the average Chinese, when they hear about making an arms agreement with the United States, automatically thinks about the Opium Wars and what the agreements that China had to sign. Do you see a real distrust of arms agreements with the U.S. in the general populace, in the PLA, and in the CCP, and also in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs?
Actually, China did not take part in the process of the formulation of many arms control agreements or treaties. But China later joined these agreements or treaties or signed them and approved them at National Congress of the National People's Congress. And China have observed or followed these articles very, very strictly. And China did not do anything which violates the relative articles of any arms control agreements or arms control treaties, like NPT, like other agreement. We are implementing all these internationally wide accepted documents in a very, very strict way. And I think the Chinese will increase its involvement in the future formulation of new arms control agreements and treaties. And China is ready to ratify CTBT, and China is considering talking with the United States and other nuclear club members on cutoff, and China is taking into consideration on control of small arms in Africa, etc. So we don't have any problem. So we will continue to do that in the future. Actually, this is the widespread concept of China. So Chinese want to be responsible, not only to themselves, but also to regional and global security. Thank you. I hope I've answered your question.
So no, I guess what you're saying is there is no bad feeling about arms control.
No.
Okay, good.
You know, China is not strong enough to formulate any agreement or treaty. But China, as soon as it enters into this treaty, observe and follow and implement these treaties in a very strict way. And China is a beneficiary of the existing orders. So why do we have to be against it? Thank you.
Thank you.
I am a freshman in agricultural art and science, and I believe it was last year that in the similar event that I asked, I believe it was the ambassador of Myanmar, that about the question of the island chain of Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Philippines, that what he will think of it. And he said to me that by pivoting to the Southeast Asia, United States is trying to enhance its cooperation with China. And would you think of this as a hostility or as a genuine wish to improve the United States and China's relationship? And how will the new, the chairman of the party, the Communist Party, also known as the president, think of it?
I don't know what the president and the new new general secretary of the party committee think about, but I believe that China is ready and waiting to cooperate with the United States over South China Sea. I'm coming back in March to New York to take part in a conference on South China Sea. There, I'm invited to write a paper on Sino-US relations in South China Sea, and I will present that at the conference or symposium. On South China Sea, I want to emphasize a few points. Number one, there was no dispute before 1960s. All countries had admitted that the South China Sea belonged to China. How to approve that? You can read world atlas published by different countries, including Vietnam, including the Philippines, Malaysia, and the other disputing parties. Why the disputes? Because of the discovery of the oil and the gas there. Second, the dispute in South China Sea was not as hot as today because of many reasons. One is the introduction of UNCLOS. And third, if you look at the actions of China, they are all reactive. China had never taken any initiative action against any other country. If you look at the Mischief incident, Mischief Island was occupied by China. Before that, Chinese government advocated the disputing parties do not expand their occupation, but no country listened to China's warning. But after China's occupation of Mischief Island, all other parties stopped their expansion of occupation. Up to now. Until up to the provocation by the Philippine government over Huanyan Island. Number 4, in South China Sea, China did not do anything in the recent years. I don't know why Chinese were criticized for becoming increasingly assertive, increasingly provocative, and increasingly aggressive. I don't know why. Why these criticisms? As a Chinese soldier, I understand that Chinese did not take any military action against any other country except we are provoked. Of course, if we are provoked, we will have to respond in the similar ways. Furthermore, we have established the regime of joint patrol with Vietnam over Tonkin, Bay of Tonkin. So there is a positive progress in this region. And fifthly, I admit United States has interest in South China Sea. Chinese have never neglected or rejected the interest of the United States. in this area. Actually, the lanes of sea lanes of communication or the sea lanes of the world community, they do not belong to any individual country. And China is prepared to protect safety and the security of the sea lanes of communication together with other members of disputing parties and with the United States in particular. Because China is becoming increasingly dependent on the sea lanes of communication in South China Sea. China is the most unwilling country to damage the safety and the security of these sea lanes of communication. Therefore, I hope that Chinese behavior will be understood by other parties. And I hope that the United States will play a positive role instead of sending wrong signals to its allies or to those countries which have got disputes with China. Anyway, we are ready to cooperate with the United States. And we are ready and we are willing to cooperate with the United States. I don't think without cooperation from the United States, it's impossible for China and other members to maintain safety and the security of the sea lanes of communication in South China Sea. Thank you.
General Zhu, I am a sophomore student at Emory, and I have two questions. One is about the Chinese policy, and another is about yourself. Can I? Okay, sure, thanks. So for China's policy, you know, there is an archipelago pretty near to Diaoyu or Senkaku Islands. It is called Ryukyu, aka Okinawa, aka Liuqiu. And as we all know, this archipelago was previously a tribal country of the Imperial China and was invaded by Japan. That's why it's under Japan's control right now. In the history, Imperial, Republican, or the People's Republic of China never signed any treaty with Japan regarding that the sovereignty of Ryukyu became, belonged to Japan. And even in the 70s, the Taiwanese Republic of China government in Taiwan, their foreign ministry made an announcement that this territory is not Japanese, it's not under Japanese sovereignty. So these years, the Chinese government never, or rarely expressed any view on the sovereignty of these islands. So my question is that, what is the actual view or of the mainland Chinese government on these islands, and if you regard these islands as Chinese or international property, then will there be any possible action taken in the future? And second question is about yourself. I'm sorry. So as a widely regarded hawkish person, I'm not really sure if you accept this name, but basically, Emory University has a very good relationship with the Tibetan 14th Dalai Lama. And what do you feel personally, just personally, standing on stage, making speech, that's a place that Dalai Lama probably has used to stand on and made his speech? Thank you very much.
Thank you. On Diaoyu Island, I think the sovereignty issue is very clear. According to the international documents. And that is my attitude, and I believe that is the attitude of the government of China. And I believe that in the handover agreement, the United States just hand over the right of administration, legislation, and jurisdiction. But the United States did not hand over the sovereign right to Japan. I think it's quite clear. I don't think I need to say anything about it. The problem lies in the fact that the present crisis has been created by the Japanese side. In China, there is a saying, 解铃还须系铃人, 怎么说? Anyway, I believe that the problem has been created by the Japanese side. So the Japanese side should take the first step to compromise, to return to the original point. Because it is Japanese who first violate the status quo. So I hope that Japanese will understand the stand of Chinese government and the sentiments of the Chinese people. I don't think the government leaders of China have any room to make compromise on that issue. Because, to be very frank, today's Chinese leaders are not Mao Zedong, neither Deng Xiaoping. They are not capable enough to make any compromise on sovereignty issue or territorial issue. I hope that the outsiders will understand that. As far as Dalai Lama is concerned, I highly respect him because he is very influential. He is very knowledgeable in the doctrines of Tibetan Buddhist. And he is not actually a normal person. And I do hope that this is one thing. The policy of supporting independence is another thing. I think for the academic institute, many institutes have invited Mr. Dalai Lama to speak on the doctrines of Tibetan Buddhism. But if it is an official event, I think that is another business. Chinese are strongly against the official arrangement instead of technical arrangement, like academic arrangement. I think that they are totally different. Because if you look at the whole process of Tibetan issue, I think many Chinese may understand it, or many foreigners may understand it. This is a very, very sensitive issue in China. Because if you look at the situation at home, and I hope that the Dalai Lama will play a role in promoting the harmony between the Han Chinese and the Tibetan Chinese. And I hope that Dalai Lama will play a positive role in managing the relationship between China on one hand, on the Tibetan issue, and the other countries on the other hand, because this is very important. Don't try to make use of the problems in Tibet to damage the harmony between two different ethnic groups in China. And don't try to make use of this incident or this issue to evilize China's image. I don't think that is not good enough. That is not good at all. So this will not be accepted by the Chinese side, not to mention the government, even by the majority of the Chinese. Thank you.
I really appreciate your speech here, Emory. My name is Zhang Zhaoxiang, a Chinese student here studying political science in Emory. As you mentioned, distrust is one of the major problems that lie between the China and the U.S. relationship. And U.S. also often miscalculates China's intention, as China wants to have a peaceful development rather than for the aggression. But so my question is, is that possible to eliminate the distrust between the U.S. and China? Because China now this year has a very rapid growth in the military expenditure and expanding its stress in Southeast Asia, Pacific, and Africa. So, from your point of view, how can make the Americans to believe that China is seeking for the peaceful development rather than challenging its leadership in Asia? I mean, because China is it's building up its blue water navy, and they have a navy carrier now, and so from my point of view, I can imagine a situation that, for example, it's at very dark night, I walk back to my home, and that at the corner of the street, I see a very tall, big, and suspicious man holding a gun approaching me. So how can I tell that guy is saying hello rather than killing me and robbing my money? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think the only way out for China and the United States to increase trust or to build up trust and increase confidence on each other is to carry out very frank and blunt discussions and exchanges of views. This, no other way in front of us. Of course, in this regard, I have to argue that both Chinese and Americans will have to be very, very sincere in mounting this sort of consultations, dialogues, or exchanges. Yes, I do admit that in the recent years, Chinese military hardware has been developed very, very fast. I think it has got a lot of backgrounds. Number one, China did not develop its military together with its economy. For example, from 1978 to 1995, when Mr. Li Denghui was given a visa by the United States, China did not increase military budget or military expenses. And therefore, in the recent years, we have invested in the military comparatively larger. Secondly, here, there is a problem of egg and hen. What are the incidents that have made Chinese and Americans being short of trust? There are a lot. So Chinese say, we Chinese had to appreciate the Americans. Without their efforts, it's impossible for the Chinese to develop the military so fast. For example, it gave Mr. Li Denghui the visa. That awakened the Chinese, because before that, we Chinese were sleeping. It is because of the hijacking, according to Chinese understanding, of Chinese vessels over high sea. It is because of the bombing of Belgrade embassy, we Chinese truly awakened. So without these efforts from the American side, it is impossible for China to invest that much on the military. I disagree with the argument that China is building a blue water navy. If you say that is the blue water navy, China had a blue water navy in the Southern Song dynasty. You still remember when the Yuan dynasty succeeded the the naval fleet from the Southern Song dynasty, the Mongolians invaded everywhere, attacked everywhere in East Asia and Southeast Asia. They attacked Korea, attacked Japan, attacked Southeast Asia until the Jawa in Indonesia. And China was the blue navy in the Ming dynasty. The fleet of Zheng He sailed to the west on 7 occasions. I believe that if the Chinese had behaved themselves like the West later colonialists, the whole world would have been China's colony instead of British, Spain, or Portugal. Because at that time, China's fleet was so large. Each time they sailed to the West, the fleet was composed of 250 ships. The biggest ship was 14 tons in displacement. It was so big. And what Chinese did, Chinese sent their porcelains, silks. Finally, Chinese fleet found a way to import wood from Africa, because when they disembarked those products or goods from China, it's not safe enough to sail on sea. So they found some good wood on ship and then carried them to China. And they found it's good. So you look at the Imperial Gardens and some Palace Museum, the tombs in Dongli, eastern tombs, western tombs of the Qing dynasty, all these wood have been taken from African countries by these fleets. And they use it for several hundred years, from Ming dynasty until the Qing dynasty. So that is the idea. So China had the naval fleet, the Blue Water Navy, more than 800 years ago. So not to mention, of course, China's development of navy capabilities have attracted attention from the outside world. Because China is different today, we have a lot of interest to protect. And if you look at the security environment of major powers, I think that of China is the most complicated one, is most threatening one. Therefore, all these sort of things can justify China's development of naval capabilities. So don't try that Chinese Navy fleet can challenge that of the United States, or Chinese will challenge the United States. Some of the exercises had to be staged in the high sea, because if you carry out it in the disputed areas, the Japanese will be strongly against it. So we Chinese had no choice. We carry out this sort of exercises in the high sea instead of in the Western Pacific, instead of in East China Sea. So that's the purpose of moving the exercise onto the high sea, to avoid the dispute, different tones on the exercises, especially the opposition from the Japanese side, and our neighboring countries, or those countries on China's periphery. I hope that these sort of efforts will be understood by the outsiders. Another one, with development of China's economic capabilities, Chinese are determined to fulfill bigger obligations to the world community. If you look at what Chinese have done in the recent years, I think you can find that. For example, the escort in Somalia, the peace operations in the framework of the United Nations. China has been the greatest country in sending its observers and the peace operators in the framework of the United Nations, among the 5 permanent members. And Chinese are short of hardwares to perform much greater missions in this regard. For example, in 2004, I still remember very clearly, there are 2 incidents which struck me very sharply. One is the incident of the tsunami in Indian Ocean. We prepared a lot of disaster relieving goods for victims in these countries. Unfortunately, the Navy and the Air Force were not strong enough to deliver these goods to this area. We had to rent the aircraft from Singapore to deliver some of the materials to the disaster-stricken area. Second is the case in the earthquake in Pakistan. The defense attaché of Pakistan told me, we officials, we diplomats in Beijing understand that China has provided greatest amount of relieving materials to Pakistan. But the Pakistan people do not know that. Why? All the goods were delivered to the the earthquake area by the Marine Corps helicopters of the United States. What the Pakistanians see are the efforts of the relieving goods from the United States instead of from China. Another story is the fact that in 2008, there was an earthquake in Sichuan. Almost all the roads were destroyed. Premier Wen Jiabao ordered the military to reopen the road in a matter of 2 days. How was it possible? All the roads were destroyed. And furthermore, to reopen the road, you need heavy hardwares. We do not have it. We cannot lift the different tools into the hard area of the quake. And we had to rent heavy lift helicopters from Russia. So these are the stories. All these peace and benign actions, even disaster relieving operations, need better and more advanced hardwares of the military. I hope this China's development will be understood in from the different angles. Thank you.
Good afternoon, General. Thank you for coming here to speak with us. I have many questions for you, but the main question, and it's very simple, the question that I want to ask is, as a Chinese American and for other future aspiring ambassadors that are also Chinese American, how do you suggest we facilitate the trust and understanding between the United States and China, especially when in terms of protecting economic interests between both our nation's interests and of our heritage interests? That's it.
That's a very challenging question. I think you threw me into a very, very awkward position. To be very frank, the Chinese government and even the ordinary Chinese people living in China encourage those who are studying or working in the United States to work together with the United States, to our American friends, to foster an enduring friendship and more enduring constructive relationship between China and the United States. Of course, I hope that you can contribute your part to increase the mutual understanding between the two ethnic groups of China and the United States, because you understand China much better than Native Americans. And you understand the United States much better than the Chinese living on the continent of Asia. So you are in the right position to do this job, to promote mutual understanding between us. And I hope that this sort of job or work or effort will contribute to the grand understanding and the mutual acceptance between China and the United States. I'm sure that you can do a pretty good job in this regard. I mean, all the faculty members and the students, they can do, because you know both sides, not like me. Thank you.
My name is Fei. I'm a history major at Emory. 2 days ago, there was a New York Times article saying that there was a call for constitutional reform in China. So first, do you think the reform is feasible? Second, do you think a constitutional reform will ameliorate the mistrust and the hostility between China and United States, or it won't matter? That's it. Thanks.
At present, I think in China there are different schools of thoughts. Constitutional reform is only one of the thoughts or schools. Of course, this is constructive. I believe that the political reform is the third stage of the overall reform of China. So first stage is the economic reform, which has been remarkably successful. And the second stage is the social reform, which is going on. I believe that Chinese will continue its efforts in the social reform to provide much better benefits to the ordinary people and to let all people in China to enjoy the fruits of the reform and development. And last stage is the political reform, I think, including which direction of the reform will head for is still a debating issue. But some of the issues are quite clear, which are very, very visible. And I think the new leaders are pretty much determined to push forward the political reform. One is the fighting against corruption, which has been staged onto the stage, which has already started. I think this is a fundamental reform in the political field. Second is the governance of the ruling party, which is very important, I believe. If the party is well governed, I think in China, any issue can be addressed. Third is the strengthening the rule of law. And fourth might be increase the supervision within the party. And fifth might supervision from the different social walks, etc. So all these are on the agenda for the reform in the future. So that is the visible direction of future China's reform. Of course, I can provide you with a long list, which is not finalized. So I cannot tell you all about it because I'm not a fortune teller. So I have to observe what is going on and what some of the things have been decided. So I think the political reform is a foregone conclusion. There is no debate at all. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Barama Jr. here in Emory. Last November, during the 18th Party Congress, there were 7 members who were elected to be the Politburo and the Standing Committee of the party, but not a single one of them is in the military. However, that's not the case a couple decades ago. For example, your grandfather, General Zhu De, was member of the Politburo in the Standing Committee. So my question is, what is your perspective on this change?
One thing is the history, because the People's Republic of China was founded by those forefathers of the revolution, the military leaders. So none of them is free from the military affairs at the beginning of the founding of the People's Republic of China, except those who were from the other parties, like Zhang Nan, etc. Second is the fact that with the change of the emphasis of China's development, you can see that the economic and the social development is the emphasis of China's development. Only by doing so can we maintain stability and develop faster. Therefore, military is becoming increasingly, military is becoming increasingly less important in the overall development of the country. It is because China is facing no imminent war threat. It is because military is neither edible nor wearable. So why do we have to spend that money on that? And therefore, why do you have to keep a guy in the standing committee of the Political Bureau? And the third is that China is becoming increasingly comfort to the common practice of the world, that is the social society development. These are major reasons for the change in the members of the Standing Committee of the Political Bureau. Thank you. I hope I've answered your question. Thank you.
We are going to take 2 more questions. If that's okay, because I want to make people stay around for the end of this, so if you don't mind, go ahead.
Hi, General Zhu. My name's Justin Nie, and I'm a sophomore in the college. And my question is, The Economist had an issue a couple weeks ago saying President Obama had to deal with, in his next 4-term, deal with the fiscal policy, China and the Arab countries. And as we know, China's demand in energy continued to grow, and it has been expanding into Central Asia region. So just my question is, what are some points and areas Chinese government has to be careful when dealing with Muslim countries? As we know, China has so far, fortunately, not having any international terrorist attacks.
Well, this is actually, we are also facing with the terrorist attacks, because China is a little bit different from the United States, because China is bordering Muslim countries. Of course, I do not mean that all Muslim countries are supporting the terrorist organizations or terrorist activities. Actually, China has cooperated with those countries on China's periphery in especially in South Asia and Central Asia. China have got enduring cooperation with Pakistan on countering terrorism. China have cooperated with those countries in Central Asia in the framework of Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And besides that, we have bilateral cooperations with those countries on information sharing, on the education of the security officers, on the education of the armed forces, and on the warning systems of against the terrorism. And another one is the fact that China, I cannot say that China is not hated by some of the Muslims, individual Muslims, because there is a large population of Muslims in China, especially in the western part of China. Therefore, we have to be pretty much alert against the terrorist attacks, but not necessarily from the Muslims. Even the Han ethnic group, they also launch terrorist attacks against ordinary people. So in dealing with those countries in the Muslim world, one principle, one fact is that China introducing the policy of non-interference into the internal affairs of these Muslim countries. This policy is very popular among the developing countries, also in Muslim countries. This is a little bit different from that of the United States. Many of the hatred against the United States may come from the interference of the outsiders. Thank you. Oh, of course, I have no intention to educate my American friends present here.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. I'm a senior this year, and I had a question about the types of discussions that resolve miscalculation and distrust. So in 2007, there was an anti-satellite test done by China to shoot down a satellite, and a lot of scholars since then have written that this is kind of the beginning of a space race to see who can get into space first. Since then, they also have written about something called a code of conduct about how we should approach space, which seems to be one of the types of discussion that you say will help decrease mistrust and misconduct. What do you think would be something that would be negotiated out? What do you think China would be interested in seeing about U.S. space policy that they could change?
Actually, we Chinese were very eager to discuss with the Americans on the negotiation of a treaty on the non-weaponization of the outer space many years ago. But at that time, the United States was enjoying very obvious superiority over other countries. So the Americans rejected China's suggestions repeatedly. And in the recent years, because of China's efforts, China's space capabilities have been developed very fast and to a very, very, to the extent that has attracted the attention of the United States, especially those guys working on outer space programs. I believe that space is a very, very important area that China and the United States can cooperate with each other. And we once cooperated with the United States. For example, China tried to launch the American satellite with China's missile. Unfortunately, that launch was a failure. And later on, I think we launched some missiles for the United States, satellites for the United States, because China's cost is much, much cheaper than that of the NASA, yes. I think the most urgent thing for us to do, and for China and the United States, is to formulate rules and regulations on the space game. This is very important because both China and the United States, and even the whole world, is becoming increasingly dependent on the technologies, those facilities in the outer space. So we need to negotiate to increase mutual understanding. And I think, of course, this negotiation does not mean that it should prevent the development of other countries. That's very important. I hope that future space treaties will not be NPT or like others, which are not fair enough. And this unfairness of the treaties has been the root cause of the proliferation of nuclear weapons and the nuclear technologies. So I hope that the treaty will be, or that agreement will be beneficial to all and can secure all the interests of different countries in outer space instead of just serving some of countries in the world or major countries in the world. So I believe this negotiation will be launched. I hope it will not be postponed for long. Thank you.
One more question. This gentleman's been waiting for quite some time, so this is the last
Thanks.
one.
Hey, General. My name is Matt. I'm a writer. My question is, if the U.S. recognized sort of a strategic buffer around China, maybe the exclusive economic zone around 200 miles, and it also ratified the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, would Chinese leaders be more flexible to allow multilateral bodies to sort of adjudicate the territorial disputes? I know it's not directly related, but I think it would relieve some tension, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are.
I don't think these two things have got anything linked directly. But anyway, on the ratification of the UNCLOS is the business of the United States. And I believe that UNCLOS itself is a little bit contradictory to the original laws, original international laws, or the laws on the sea. But I believe that if the United States can ratify UNCLOS, I believe that will be a great contribution to the seriousness of the world or international laws, because you are the biggest player in the world, but you are still, I cannot say rejecting the modification or ratification of this law, but I believe that is a real issue for the world community. What role the United States will play in this regard. Of course, if the United States can be more responsible on that issue, I think the Chinese will applaud it. Thank you.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.